If there's anything worth praising about TF2, it's the 9 classes. In every single way, from gameplay, visuals, personality, what have you, it's clear there was a lot of thought put into them, and they remain as the gold standard for a cast of characters in your typical class-based FPS. However, one part about them that goes underappreciated is easily how well balanced they are. In a typical pub game, you can't really go wrong with any class, and performance with them comes down to your own skill rather than following a certain meta. It seems Valve made a perfectly balanced roster, or so they want you to think. Because TF2's classes are not balanced in power, at least not explicitly, however in a way that's smartly designed and makes sure the game doesn't fall into degeneracy. To really understand what I mean by this, we must look at the relation between balance and fun first. In a lot of games released nowadays, there's always a push for the game to be super balanced and fair. This isn't entirely a foolish cause, as having the most options viable is something that should be ideal, as you don't want to personally make things awful to use. Usually people like stuff that's stronger, therefore you want your entire sandbox to feel powerful, and therefore good to use. Keyword there being feel. Because if something feels satisfying and empowering, but in reality isn't that good at a competitive standpoint, that's still a success in game design. On the flip side, if you make a perfectly balanced game where all options are viable but none of them are particularly satisfying to use, then the game is simply just not fun. On the flip side, you want everything to be also fun to fight against, as you can have the most fun playstyle in the world, but that's not going to matter if no one wants to go up against. This is often where the power of something is often scaled with the difficulty of it, as people are more willing to accept one-shots and insanely powerful abilities if they were hard to pull off, and people are willing to accept easier weapons if they're not as good. This comes up a lot in TF2, with one main exception to this rule that we'll bring up in a bit. To summarize, balance doesn't necessarily mean a game will be fun, and a game doesn't need to be balanced to be fun. All that matters if the game feels reasonable rather than just an unbalanced mess. With that out of the way, we're going to cover every TF2 class from the weakest to the strongest, explain why they're at this place, and how the game benefits from them being weak or strong. First, let's talk about that one exception to the skill required correlating with strength for a second. There's no sugarcoating it. Spy is undeniably the worst class in TF2. His offensive options are markedly weaker than everyone else. His utility isn't enough to make up for it, unlike the sniper and medic, and he gets shut down by people remembering to look behind him. Sure, his one-shot capabilities are insane, his invisibility can be a pain to deal with, but it's not enough to compete with the rest of TF2's classes. Combined with the disproportionate amount of skill he needs to play, and Spy seems a complete balance disaster. However, there's two things you need to consider. One, he's not that bad. In a pod environment, you're still able to get a ton of kills and top score as the Spy, otherwise we wouldn't have all these montages. This is mainly because casual is comprised of a bunch of random people ranging from people who just installed the game to professional gamers, but mostly those are the lower halves. But what about competitive? Well, he's not a full-time class in 6v6, however there are niche scenarios where the Spy genuinely gets his shine. If this is the worst class in TF2, then it's safe to say Valve has done a good job balancing their game. Because if the Spy was just completely unplayable, then he wouldn't be this popular among every level of the player base. The second reason that it's okay for the Spy to be low tier is he's just really annoying to fight against sometimes. Because sure, the Spy can be just another free kill most of the time, but when he isn't, he's an absolute menace. You've got a class that punishes you for looking the wrong way in a game all about looking at people to kill them, and he can go invisible to get away. Also, he's a character that can just one-shot you, which isn't fun to go up against. Besides, I can't really think of a good buff for a Spy that doesn't break him in some way. In conclusion, the Spy may be the weakest class in the game, but that doesn't make him less fun, and honestly everyone else would have less fun if he was better. See any Dead Ringer Kunai spy for living evidence of this. Speaking of spy, let's go check out the classes he counters. I'm putting both Heavy and Engineer in a similar category because they're both heavily defensive classes with automatic hit scan weaponry, and they're both not very good. While both classes can be a serious threat and lock down an entire area completely denying certain classes access, they share the same problem with speed. Heavy's lack of speed is more literal, as the slowest class of the game becomes even slower for his main method of attacking prepared, and his minigun takes time to start firing. Ergo, he often needs a lot of time to prepare for a fight and will get cooked if he's caught off guard by faster classes. Engineer isn't slow in the literal sense per se, but most of his utility requires a lot of setup. You need to constantly take more ammo and be near the buildings to upgrade them, and if they're in the wrong spot, you need to move them while being constantly vulnerable, even more so as a rescue ranger. This doesn't even mention needing to build these buildings, meaning you're either going to be a sitting duck hoping an enemy with high burst damage doesn't start enforcing zoning laws, or you just wait an eternity for the building to start to make it itself. Without these buildings, the engineer is just basically a worse scout in most scenarios. However, these weaknesses don't manifest as much when the defense is already handed to you, which makes Engineer and Heavy quite strong in defensive situations, such as being on the red team on attack or defend game modes, or being on the last point in 5CP game modes. This is good, because these classes have clear strengths and weaknesses without feeling too oppressive, as if they were stronger, they would probably be too defense-oriented. Sure, slow moments are very important for TF2's pacing, but you also don't want every map to play like Dust Bowl, as very few people like sitting around waiting for something to happen at a choke point. Basically, it's of utmost importance for the defensive classes to not be too strong, otherwise every game would just be too defender-side and every map would play like Dust Bowl or Powerhouse. And yes, I know some people would like that, but most people aren't looking to stare down a choke point, and playing Power would be suffering with a buffed Engineer or Heavy. Oh hey, that's our next class to discuss. Pyro's a bit of a weird class to rank, because he's a specialist with some strange specializations to say the least. He's mainly a close range class that can sometimes just get out damaged at his most effective range, and Pyro doesn't really have the same speed to get in like Scout. However, his real strength doesn't necessarily come in his proficiency at team fights or duels, but rather a special utility that's all over the place. The Flamethrower's primary fire is mainly used to check for spies and weaken the healing of the medic. However, its real power comes in the Air Blast, easily Pyro's strongest tool. It can reflect projectiles, push enemy players into hazardous or disadvantaged positions, extinguish teammates, and stop Ubers. Overall, the Pyro has some great utility and decent stats, however is mostly held back by a severe lack of range and DPS. And thank goodness for that, as anyone who's played TF2 for any amount of time can tell you how annoying this class is. The Flamethrower basically requires no aim and can kill you even after you've killed the enemy Pyro, and certain unlocks can make him even more aggravating. Air Blast can also just be infuriating at certain modes, as getting air blasted into a corner with no way to escape is just horrible. But you already knew how aggravating fighting a Pyro can be, now imagine if he's buffed. Overall, Pyro is an evil class played by evil people, and that's the reason why he's the lower mid tier. Now let's get away from this diabolical close range specialist so we can get closer to TF2's diabolical long range specialist. Let's just get this out of the way first. Long-range characters are already annoying. They will never not be annoying. Anyone who's played as a zoner in a fighting game can attest to that. Combine this with the fact he can kill anyone in one hit with the proper setup or quick aim in the case of light classes, and you've got a recipe for a character that seems absolutely busted, until you realize that's literally all he has. When you take away his headshots, the sniper has barely any damage for duels or team fights, low health, mediocre speed, and just in general dies if he just gets jumped. And don't even try pushing the objective. That's basically asking to die. Sniper thrives in slow situations where he can pick off targets while his team protects him and gets left behind in chaotic modes where he can't catch up to his team or the enemy is constantly pushing. This is why often Sniper in pubs either feels like a free kill or an absolute headache, since his strengths and weaknesses are so polarizing. But unlike the aforementioned classes, his strength is a lot more applicable. Some people might continue to argue I placed him too low, but this is my video and not some ginger from Texas. The reason Sniper is gatekept from being on the upper half of the class hierarchy is simply because fighting him either feels like a Sisyphean task, or the easiest kill in your entire career. However, the first is the one you're most concerned about when balancing a game. But how is Sniper, the new most hated class in the game, not in the top 3 best classes in the game? Because the next 4 classes are simply better, starting with the Scout. Remember how I said the Sniper can't do the objective for anything? The Scout caps objectives better than anyone in the game, meaning he is literally the best class in the game at fulfilling the win condition of the match. While every other class counts as 1 person on objective, the Scout counts as 2, because it is twice the man that you are. This capping speed is usually powerful, but becomes downright comical on certain last points. I mean, it's basically GG if the opponent overextends and forgets to check for Scouts. But none of that matters if the Scout's other attributes are bad, which they aren't. Sure, he's tied for the lowest health and his bullets don't do anything at longer ranges, but he's the fastest class in the game and has a double jump, which is insanely good. He can get the health packs faster than anyone, he can traverse the map faster than anyone, he can rush down opponents faster than anyone, he can traverse farther gaps than anyone, he just makes normal map obstacles look like a joke. And once he's close, he can delete anyone because the scattergun is that strong. The only thing he's bad at is if a sentry is around, then he's just forced to go somewhere else or play around it, but that's basically it. The Scout is borderline overpowered in 6v6 and incredibly good at pods if you know which routes to play. However, one could argue he deserves his throne for one main reason. He's hard to play. You're a bad Sniper, no problem, you'll still live for quite a bit and maybe get 1 or 2 body shot kills. You're a bad Scout, you are not doing anything. Every fight with the Scout feels fair, as if he doesn't really have any cheap weapons, it purely relies on good movement to not die. Meaning the only time the Scout feels like he's unfair is if the opponent is making it their goal, or if the enemy Scout is playing out of their mind. Which in that case, any class played by someone who has 5,000 hours in the game feels frustrating to fight against. However, the Scout is held back by the fact he has a hard counter in the form of Engineer. Soldier and Delman don't have this weakness. The explosive classes in TF2 are both incredibly strong for very similar reasons. For one, they are naturally equipped for crowd control of explosive weapons. Meanwhile, most classes need to focus on one target. The Soldier and Delman can potentially kill 2 enemies at the same time. Not only that, but the explosive weapons of both classes are the best in destroying sentry guns, which are usually an integral part of the defensive lineup. When a defense relies heavily on a sentry, it will often fall with said sentry. In addition, grenades and rockets naturally do high damage, making both classes suited for both team fights and duels, with the rockets being better for single target encounters, and the grenades better for hordes of enemies. Both classes also have decently high health, meaning you'll often be able to take more damage from the average class. One may argue their below average walking speed holds them back, but this is easily nullified by their ability to use explosives to propel themselves across the map, sometimes achieving higher speeds than the Scout. Moving on to more specific aspects of these classes, the Soldier is generally the more well-rounded of the two. The straight path that rockets take rather than the arc through grenades generally makes it better for one-on-one fights, as you can easily get splash damage kills and high ground basically wins you the fight half the time. On top of this, explosive jumping is more on demand, as well as Sticky Bomb takes time to arm, the Soldier can just fire that rocket immediately. This allows to be a more active threat, but it definitely can occasionally need a bit more support. Yeah, it's probably the biggest draw of the class, as there was very few situations where playing Soldier would be a bad idea. I suppose that sometimes you may not want to approach a situation as Demo or Scout. However, while the Soldier is more reliable, the Delman is just generally more powerful. He has a total of 12 explosives in this clip when fully loaded up, and can use all of them to clear out a team. Additionally, Sticky bombs can be used to more effectively lock down a point or make an area more dangerous the longer he's allowed to occupy it, making a threat to continually become stronger. And while these classes may not have extreme standout strengths like the previously mentioned specialists, they're much more reliable, and that matters. And since they don't really have any standout strengths, they also usually feel more reasonable when you die to them, unless you're not a big fan of splash damage. However, there's one final class that stands above the rest, and generally you're not going to completely outdie to them. Unless it was from a random crit, of course. But you can use the process of elimination, so you'd already know we're talking about the medic. The medic has one main weakness. His weapons aren't really that good for fighting. The syringe guns are basically worthless, the Crusader's crossbow can't really keep up in close combat, and the melees are just simple melees. So how is he the strongest class in the game? The medigun, of course. It's reliable healing with no resource cost or setup needed. It also overheals to make patients even harder to kill. So even if nobody's injured, he's still great to have around. But you already know free healthcare off needing to pay tax is a good deal. What really pushes the medic into essential territory is the Uber charge, which is arguably the most important mechanic in the game. Heal and survive for 40 seconds, you have access to God mode for you and the guy you're healing. Meet the enemy team either to knock you away, flee from the area, or just straight up die. There are also other flavors of Uber charge that boost damage massively, nullify knockback with unreal healing on the side, or make the opponent want to uninstall the game. Combined with a pretty good movement speed, an alright health pool, and passive health regeneration, you've easily got the strongest class of the game. Then again, what better fit for the strongest class than the one healer? Unlike a comic class being the strongest, he won't feel too oppressive in the game, and he incentivizes playing a supportive role by making them the most impactful role on the team. Overheal is also a good way to make the medic an active participant outside of combat, while also raising potential effective health while making me want to kill myself like in Overwatch. The only annoying thing about the medic is the facts here, and that's a balancing problem, not a fundamental class design issue. In other words, Team Fortress 2 was destined to have one stand above the rest. It's a good thing we end up with a benevolent king instead of a malicious one. But this isn't even the best part of this class hierarchy. What truly makes TF2's balance great is you can only feel this class power disparity in competitive formats. In a typical pub match of TF2, anyone can cook. It doesn't matter what class they're playing, if you're doing the right things at the right time in the right place, anyone can massively influence the outcome of a match. This is one of the reasons Team Fortress 2 manages to be universally appealing. Rarely do you ever feel the need to conform to the pressures of what the game wants you to do. One major part of this is how class counters work. As while all classes counter others and get countered by other classes, it's still winnable for the less favored class. Some counters are harsher than others, like Engineer against Scout, and still find opportunities to still run their pockets. Now if pubs usually having an even class distribution, it doesn't feel like you're losing because of your character choice most of the time, and that's great. It manages to work for both high-level play and casual players, as one side gets all the skillful classes to play most of the time with ample opportunities for specialist classes, and the other just gets to play with the whole sandbox without the need to conform to anything of their own wants. It's like this game was designed to be fun instead of another modern esports chasing title that tries to make everything perfectly balanced but just ruins the game for everyone. Sorry, I had to get that last jab at modern gaming in. Overall, TF2 makes the more reasonable classes good, the more annoying classes weaker, and you barely notice it because the class counters are designed so well. Thanks for stopping by, and hopefully we'll meet again.